Welcome to the second half of this session's lecture, where we will be working more closely with some of the basic copywriting elements. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to open this part of the lecture with the long versus short copy approach. In theory, there really is no limit to how long copy should be if you get results. Why then should there be such controversy over copy length? Let's take a moment and look at two factors that increase the need for a lot of copy. Price point. The higher the price point, the more copy required to justify the price or create the need. This is a general rule, unless the price point is perceived to be of tremendous value, then less copy may be required. Or the lower price point appears to lack credibility, then more copy is required. More copy will allow you to increase the value of a product and add many more pounds to your retail price. In short, by educating the consumer, you can demand more money for your product or service. The second case is the unusual item. The more unusual the product, the more you need to relate that product to the user, and the more you've got to focus on creating that buying environment and explaining the product's new features. So, in conclusion, there are two basic reasons for using the long copy approach. The first is to allow you to create an environment that will place your prospect in the proper buying mood. And the second is to give you the time necessary to tell the full story of your product. Short copy also works. For most of us, the long copy approach isn't appropriate. Even for me when I introduce a new recording artist to the world. The fact is, for most of us, our audience has a very short attention span. We have a very confined space to pitch emotion, uniqueness, values, and benefits. My artist-related and label-related copy was very short, yet I still sold a lot of music. So how did I do it? First, I created my environment through photography. The artists were photographed using fine photography. A great deal of care and thought were put into creating an image for them. Secondly, I was a stickler when it came to album cover design. Album covers, they have to pop. Think about the old days when we had music stores with thousands of CDs, all competing to place themselves in our hot little hands. What caught your eye in that endless sea of CD covers? Aardvark CD covers were always designed to be eye-catching, from font to color palette to imagery. Thirdly, unlike many industries, we couldn't compete on price. Price was dictated to us externally. Even download prices were dictated to us through services like iTunes. So price for me could never be a consideration. However, price may very well be a consideration for you. Since my buying environment was so effective in placing the consumer in a buying mood with the use of images, art design, and color, a lot of what normally would have been done in copy was being done visually. Then again, my medium was a website or social media, which typically requires a short copy approach. These online spaces created the needed environment, thus saving me the time of creating it with copy. We'll be going over online environments in a lot more detail in the other units. I'm not trying to sell you on using short copy. I use long copy at times, and sometimes very long copy indeed. But the long copy I use is usually the only alternative because the newness, uniqueness, or thought point of a new genre of music or subgenre of music are challenging enough that only the long copy version does the job. For you, it may be your price point. As I said earlier, high price point items require a lot of justification and explanation. In truth, I'm not for long or short. I'm for causing the prospect to exchange his or her hard-earned money for a product or service, and quite frankly, copy length has always been just one of several considerations in producing copy. In short, copy should be long enough to cause the reader to take the action you request, and for them to feel the emotion and see the value and the benefit. Do people read all that copy? Some do, and there are enough of them who do for brands to make sales. One of the things that copy should do is harmonize with the reader or viewer. Branding in all of its forms, from marketing to PR to advertising, is the ultimate form of communication in that its purpose is to cause an action to be taken by consumers, usually to exchange their salary for a product or service. But for some reason, many professionals in these fields, they're missing an important key in this form of communication. Basically, that it needs to be personal. So how personal is the spam that you receive in your inbox? Or that cold call intrusion? I mean, do they even ask if it's a good time to interrupt you? Or what about that piece of direct mail that was dropped into your letterbox? Too many copywriters, especially those behind spam emails and direct mail, they write their email and letters as though they were orating from some distant podium, speaking through a microphone and addressing a large audience. I'll use an example from Sugarman. For example, we can read copy that sounds like, "We at ABC Company wish to invite all of you to visit our exhibit again at the upcoming trade show. Our staff will be there to meet you and demonstrate our new and novel button machine." Now, the more personal way of saying the exact same thing might be, "Hi, you might remember me from the last trade show. Well, I'd like to invite you to the next one, where I'll be looking forward to meeting you again and demonstrating our new and novel button machine." Do you hear the difference? The second version is more personal and it's more direct. It's like me talking to you, not me talking to some large crowd. It's as if I, as an individual, that I was writing that letter to another human being. Now, in direct mail, this makes sense. Why not make your copy more personal and direct? More like one person talking to another in a direct and kind of like an eyeball-to-eyeball sort of folksy way. Of course, folksy may not be the best way in certain circumstances, and that's okay. As long as you use words like I, you, and me, you create the feel of a personal form of communication. Every communication should be a personal one, from the writer to the recipient, regardless of whatever medium is actually used. So as you start to write copy, to reach and motivate an individual, think in terms of writing in the first person with a personal message. If someone places an order, say, "I'm so pleased you placed your order with us. I personally," and so on. And not the stuffy old, "The impersonal Corporation X would like to thank you, blah, blah, blah." You're now ready to write that first bit of copy. Everything we've covered so far has basically prepared you for this moment. And everything that you're going to learn later in this unit, it only serves to polish what we've already covered so far. True, you're also going to get a whole bunch of new insights as well. But for right now, you're ready to kind of begin that big plunge. We copywriters don't have the benefit of having a prospective audience member basically sitting in front of us asking us questions. We have to craft our copy in such a manner that it literally leads a prospective audience member to ask the question we want to answer. Sounds hard, doesn't it? But it really isn't. It really comes down to the flow of the copy that we write. So we start by writing the headline. Will it grab the attention of the reader? Then write the subheadline. Will it compel the reader to read further? Then write the caption to go underneath an imaginary picture. Is all this strong enough to get people to read the first sentence? And then we actually sit down and we write that first sentence. Once you start using this thought process, you'll find a discipline and a direction that you may not have experienced in writing copy before. To use Sugarman's analogy, it's about leading the reader to the slippery slide and then getting them to slide down it. On the screen, you'll see Sugarman's logical progression of flowchart. By now, you should have printed out your copy of the revised brand story diagram that accompanies this session. Take a look at where this logical progression falls within that diagram. When I teach this bit in class, I typically ask my students to write a headline and a subheadline. I then asked them to write a first sentence, then the next sentence, and then the next, until each student has composed a complete copy piece. The branding copy had to flow on paper, and then, once it was on paper, the editing process was of paramount importance. One of the tips I give during this process is to create a kind of a block diagram of a logical way the copy should flow, and the questions that a prospective audience member might logically be expected to ask. In order to develop a sense for this, you break your branding copy into small, abbreviated copy blocks, similar to those in a corporate flowchart. But this flowchart goes in one direction only, and that's downwards. I made a block diagram of copy that I wrote for a new album release from a folksy rhythm and blues band called Satyagraha. I showed that at the start of the ad, I wanted to get my reader into the copy, and that I wanted to set the environment for the album. So I started the copy with the fun times that this product represented. The copy opens with a strong road trip reference, something most of us have great associations with. It could have been a magical mystery tour. I opted for the stronger kind of college road trip opener. With the first paragraph, I create interest and excitement for the product. With the second paragraph, I start to weave the drama of the product and its differences. Then I go into the next block of copy and explain why and how the album is different. Its music and some of its unique features. Music stuff, really. Logically, a reader who's read this far would want to know a little bit more about the album, like who the producer was, its quality, and what songs are going to be the singles. Therefore, the next block of copy has this information. Okay, you're really interested in purchasing the album, but you say to yourself, how can I justify it? I'd love to get this. Emotionally, I'm hooked. But how can I actually justify purchasing it? So the next block should justify the purchase. I use quotes from the big and respected music magazines and top DJs. Thought leaders, in other words. I planted the seed about how the album would be loved in the years to come, that it was a safe bet that a purchaser would actually love it. It's here that I'm giving the prospects the logic they need to make that emotional purchase. I knew I had to prove all the logical possibilities for this $12.99 retail price. By now, the consumer is saying to him or herself, okay, I want to get it, and I can justify the purchase. But what if I use it, listen to it, get tired of it, and it sits in the corner like that other CD that I thought would be cool but kind of sucks and just sits there on the shelf gathering dust? So I go into the fact that a song or songs have been featured or will be featured in a major Hollywood film or big TV shows, and I describe several reasons why people won't get tired of it. The point of each of these blocks of copy is that they're logically placed as if to anticipate the next question a prospect is going to ask. All in an environment that you've created and all flowing logically to the last part of the ad when basically you ask for the prospective to buy or to place an order. Very few record labels advertise their releases like this. Traditionally, all you get is a big image of an album cover or a band, some quotes, with a release date or out now message. So this approach made our adverts even more powerful. The listening context created the perfect buying environment. The road trip reference created a simple yet effective buying environment. Anyone who bought this album and then listened to it on a road trip would forever associate Satyagraha and that album with that road trip. That trip imprints itself onto the music, and those memories come back every time that album's listened to. We ran similar ads with surfing and beach context for surfers. Again, these variations were successful for exactly the same reasons. I'll show you two examples. Remember about the short copy. It's the image that actually conveys the emotion and the power. The words merely lead the reader in the right direction and add some additional context. Okay, so a few things that need explaining about this ad and the one that follows. You're bound to notice some huge and rather glaring omissions. The first omission is the logo. Indeed, there isn't any direct branding for Aardvark. The branding's there, it's just very subtle, in the tone of voice and in the copywriting style. The more obvious forms are the URL and the tagline at the bottom of the ad. So why no logo? Well, people don't love record labels like they used to. They don't care about labels anymore. So why waste valuable space in putting up a logo? It doesn't add anything. Trust me, this is one of those weird and really, really rare occurrences where you can get away with not using a logo. The music industry is one of the few that this actually applies to. We also know our audience. They like the fact that we don't push the label, that we keep our focus solely on our artists. There's also no price. That's because price is standardized for CDs and downloads, so adding a price is fairly redundant. Again, this is really only applicable to a handful of entertainment-related industries. You should probably include the price in your text. There are no social media logos or URLs. Well, these ads were done when social media was fairly new. MySpace was the big thing at the time. Facebook was still inside of Zuckerberg's head. Today I put on the logos, but I usually don't include URLs. My emphasis is always on the Aardvark website. That's where I want all of our traffic to go to. Even on the various social media sites, the aim is to get people to a website where they can buy the music. In some cases, if you have a blog that's where the revenue transactions occur, then that's where you always want to send your traffic. I'll be getting into this in a lot more depth in the social media unit. For now, I just want to explain why my Aardvark record ads appear the way that they do. For Aardvark, anything that didn't add value to the advertisement was kept out. For us, such things would have been extraneous noise. This won't be the case for the majority of you. You will need all of the elements we covered in the first half of this lesson. What I would invite you to do is to look at the headline, then the first sentence, and then the second sentence, to see how they were written to hook a reader and get them down the slippery slide. Think about the flowchart and see how this was accomplished in a concise manner. Gauge the emotion, the values, the benefits, and the differentiation, and think about how this was achieved in a very confined space with a minimum of text. One thing that I haven't specifically mentioned about creating a buying environment is creating an international buying environment. This is a topic that we'll delve into much more detail in the 200 levels of social media U. Suffice to say that in a more interconnected world, this is a critical element for brands. Suffice to say that the Satyagraha road trip ad was aimed specifically at the American and British markets, two markets with a long history of road trips. With the surfing ad, this was aimed at countries with vibrant and large English-speaking surfing cultures, so think the United States, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. The surfing ad was also translated into Portuguese for the surfing communities in Portugal and Brazil. When it came to promoting the album in other countries, the ad was tailored to mirror cultural elements within the various target tribes in those countries. And we did it to create an ad that resonated with them in emotional terms, but their own emotional terms. In short, we created a buying environment that reflected their culture. Again, roughly half of the 200-level copywriting unit basically covers developing copy for international markets. I mention this now as it may impact on the campaigns that you develop for this unit. And I would be remiss not to mention such an important consideration for any copywriter. When you work with copy long enough, the flow is automatic. You don't need to do flowcharts, as you can instinctively sense the next question and then answer it. A practiced copywriter can sense the questions, answer them, and can do it on a mass scale. You still might find it helpful to create a block diagram of your copy after you've written it, just to see if it flows properly and raises the right questions at the right time. How do you want to sequence your questions in your copy? What kind of environment do you want to weave through the early part of the text? What are some of the questions you would surely be asked about a product if you were a salesperson and you were selling the product face to face? It's really all about common sense. Looking at your copy as it flows onto a computer screen or onto a piece of paper, it's the mechanical part of this process, but not the most important part. It's the common sense you use to anticipate the sequence of what will be asked next, and how your copy should flow that really counts at this stage of the copywriting process. So here's the main point. The ideas presented in your copy should flow in a logical fashion, anticipating your prospect's questions and answering them as if the questions were being asked to you face to face. What you see on the screen is a form of direct marketing copy that you'll be very familiar with, the political leaflet. While I didn't write this, see how this employs the flowchart rules that we've covered already. And here's the return of another big concept we covered in the branding unit, the big idea. Once you've restated your problem, and you have the statement that you like best, sit down and list your big ideas or concepts. List several concepts. Then pick the one or two that make the most sense. Visualize your concept and see how it might be incorporated into your copy. Think again about your problem restatement and whether your concept seems to be consistent with it. Then stop. It's time to incubate. After you've slept on it for a while, start writing. First write your headline, an attention-grabbing blockbuster of a headline, short enough to grab the reader's attention. Remember again, the aim is always to keep this under 120 characters. Again, something I'll be getting into in a lot more detail. Then write the subheadline, one that's so compelling and curiosity building that your prospect must read the first sentence. And finally, write the first sentence. Make it short, to the point, and strong enough to carry you into the next sentence. And then it's down the slippery slide. In the beginning, block diagram your copy. What do the first few paragraphs do for the copy? What's the emotional appeal? Are you anticipating those questions and answering them to the satisfaction of your prospect? And are you being frank and honest in those answers? And how do those questions and answers frame your big idea? Another approach to copywriting is called patterning. Simply pick a copywriting piece written by someone you admire, or whose product or service is similar to yours, and kind of use their copy as a pattern or style from which to write. If they use a long headline, make your headline long, although keep it to no more than 120 characters. If they use a lot of captions, then you create a number of captions. Capture the feel of the copy, but be careful. Don't copy the person's layout too closely so that people reading the copywriting piece might think, well, at first glance anyway, that it's from the actual company that you are copying. This exercise is only to give you a format or a guide from which to write. If you copy the layout too closely, you're also violating the rights of the person who wrote the copywriting piece to begin with. The main points in this session are the basic steps and the thought processes you go through as you construct your copy. The key point is that you don't have the prospective audience member in front of you, so you have to anticipate the questions that he or she would ask in almost exactly the same order if they were actually standing in front of you. Flow is always important, but there's also a critical part of the copywriting process that really separates the best copywriters from all the rest. It's called the editing process, and we'll cover that next. Is there a secret to editing? Once again, editing is a mental process that almost parallels that of the act of copywriting itself. Editing requires a lot of practice, although you'll find it easier to do than writing the copy itself. Look at the act of writing the first draft as raising a kitten. It may be painful, a long process to find one, or it can go really quickly. Then compare the editing process to house training that kitten, the caring and nurturing required to ensure a healthy, happy cat. Now, if it's an indoor cat, you wouldn't want your cat to go around the house scratching all the furniture, pulling down the curtains, and doing its business all over the house, now would you? You therefore have to mold and nurture that kitten as you prepare to have them as part of your household or family. Editing is a nurturing process, and just as there's no perfect way to house train a kitten, there are many, many different approaches to editing copy that are certainly acceptable. I strive for one result when I edit, and this can be summed up like this. In the editing process, you refine your copy to express exactly what you want to express with the fewest possible words. Now this, I have to admit, it sounds really simple, doesn't it? But it is the true essence of the editing process. You want to maintain the same emotional feel, the same thought process, the same vibration that you had in mind when you first sat down to write that copy. It's just you want to do it with fewer words. This may mean that you arrange words that you wrote to make the thought more direct, or it may mean cutting out words that have little contribution to the overall feel of the copy piece. It may mean substituting new words that express your thoughts better. And it may even mean adding words to clarify a thought. But the goal in writing copy, no matter what the branding medium you use to do it, is to express the thoughts you want to convey in the most powerful way, but using the fewest possible words. With copy, you also have space restrictions. Your copy has a very focused purpose, to motivate your prospects to exchange money for your product or service, and everything you do or write leads to this one goal. So let me give you one example from copy that I wrote to promote Falmouth University's new MBA program. We'll look at my first draft of the initial 2 paragraphs, which contained 131 words, and then the final draft, which contained 106 words. We'll then study the 2 versions, and certain lessons will emerge. Read the first draft, which appears on the left of the screen, and pause the video here to do so. Now let's take the same copy and condense it to reduce the word count while still maintaining the same meaning and emotional feel. Read the edited second draft, which appears on the right of the screen, and pause the video here to do so. With 21% fewer words, the meaning and emotional appeal of the second version is exactly the same as the first one, or even better. Apply this percentage to a full page ad with 1,000 words, and you can see the difference the editing process can make. In fact, at this point, let's look at the advantages. With less copy, your copywriting piece will look less imposing to the prospect, and he or she will be more likely to read it. The second advantage is that you're making the slippery slide even more slippery by making it shorter. Your prospective reader will get to the bottom of that slide much faster, yet still get the full impact of your brand message. I use this example in my campus-based tutorials with students spending about 20 minutes coming up with their own edited version of the copy that I wrote. Most of them were excellent, and some of them were even shorter than my own version. Of course, the copy was taken out of context. They didn't see the rest of the copy and couldn't see far enough into the course's promotional webpage to see what my environment, goal, and emotional appeal for the course were. So this may not be the perfect example, but it brought out many of the principles of good editing. So here we're going to go over some more editing principles. First step, look for any words like that. For example, in my first draft, if I used words like and, or if you've tried it, or you know that, the words up to and including that can usually be eliminated. In this example, I could eliminate 8 words straight away. Second, edit for rhythm. Make sure that you vary the length of sentences so they don't sound monotonous. I'll be discussing rhythm later on in this session. 3. Even eliminating 1 word makes this a good move. Fourth principle, eliminate unnecessary words. By this I mean scroll back and look at the Falmouth MBA example that I gave. Look at the words that were deleted. The words that were eliminated, they didn't change the meaning of the final sentences, and they actually led to better results. Fifth principle, rearranging thoughts so that they flow better. And by this I mean, by reversing the order of points or thoughts, you can make your copy more emotional by focusing on the value or pleasure of acquiring the product or service, and then explaining why. When it comes to editing, take as long as you need. Sometimes editing is like raising and nurturing your child, and you need to take a lot of time. You may end up doing 10 drafts before you get to the final draft. Other times it may just flow right out of your mind with hardly any corrections. And the same holds true for me. I've written brand copy pieces that flowed right out of my brain through my pen or later onto my computer, and never had to be edited very much. Most of the time, however, I have to go through several drafts before I'm satisfied. And then there's the experience factor. The more you write, the less editing you have to do. The easier the flow out of your brain, the better you are at expressing that emotional feel of copy and the excitement that each word represents. The novice copywriter will usually need the editing process to craft and polish brand copy, whereas the more experienced copywriter has many of the editing mechanisms programmed into his or her brain. As I said before, sometimes the copy just seems to flow out through a filter that comes only from experience. However, the need for editing is sometimes unpredictable regardless of what your experience level is. Okay, the first element that I'm going to touch on is typeface. Typeface is actually a really important element. Graphic designers know that each typeface has its own personality, emotion, and legibility factor. And that's basically the whole point of this subject. You've got to determine the combination of personality and legibility that will make your copy easy to read and inviting. Since we're talking about copy here, we're talking about really only one style of type, and that's called the serif type. Serif type has short protruding lines, whereas another style of type is called sans serif, and sans serif doesn't have those little protruding bits. You'll see an example of both on the screen. So why is any of this important? Because in legibility tests, serif type produce greater comprehension than sans serif type by a 5-to-1 margin. That's right, 5-to-1. I didn't discover this myself until well into my writing career, but now all I ever use is the serif type in my copy, and especially if that's on printed paper. This is one test I wish I'd known about a lot earlier. However, and this is where things may get a little bit confusing, sans serif improves comprehension for copy that appears online and in digital formats, and by this I mean online videos, images, etc. Again, we'll be getting into this in a lot more detail in the blogging unit, but it's important to cover this now. So again, if your branding message is going to be on paper and printed, you would use serif type. If it's going to be online, by that I mean a video or a graphic of some kind or a website, you want to use sans serif. It's all about comprehension. Another important factor is the legibility of your typefaces and other parts of your copy, such as headlines, subheadlines, and various headings. Fancy type may look elegant to the type designer, but if it can't be read, it has no value. So I'm going to repeat that one again. Fancy and elegant type may look wonderful to the type designer, and that's a person who designs different kinds of font types. But if it can't be read, it has no value. It's like talking to a foreigner and finding the words difficult to understand. The most important role a typeface has is to give the greatest comprehension possible. And the second role, less important by far, is to convey the image of a company. I'm putting this screen up as a reminder. You should know all of these by heart by now. Paragraph headings are another important copywriting element. In the first half of this lecture, headings were mentioned as one of the graphic elements in branding copy. They're supposed to make the copy look less intimidating, and thus encourage the reader to read all of the copy. But paragraph headings they're also a copy element that needs to be addressed here as well. Paragraph headings can also introduce material in the paragraph that follows beneath them. Just remember that they are designed to break up the copy and make it look less intimidating. That is their primary function. They have little to do with selling or presenting the product. They simply make the copy look more inviting so that your reader will start the reading process. When a reader looks at copy that appears like one continuous paragraph, subconsciously it looks a lot more difficult to read than copy that's broken up into neat little chunks headed by various paragraph headings. Again, this is something that we'll be covering later on in this session and in the blogging unit as well. Another way to use paragraph headings is by breaking up copy in the middle of text columns, but not at the very end or the beginning of that column. Avoid placing paragraph headings right next to each other in two adjoining text columns. I do know that subheadings improve readability online. It all has to do with how people read, or rather don't read, text online. And again, this will be covered in greater detail later on in this session and in the blogging unit. A secondary purpose might be to arouse curiosity, although I've never tested to see if this was actually the case. My experience with paragraph headings tells me that curiosity does play a minor role, but that the main purpose of these headings is to make the copy look less intimidating. So product and service explanation sounds simple. It sounds pretty basic, but you'll be amazed at how many brand copy pieces leave out the simple step of explaining what the product or service actually does. Remember the cold path of the CBBE model that we covered in the branding unit? This is where copywriting for that path comes into play. Okay, so some things don't need this. We know what a CD, a DVD, a dress, an electrician, or a plumber does, and I'll get back to these in a minute. A rule of thumb here is to explain a complicated product in a very simple way, and explain a simple product in a very complex way. Let's use a smoke detector as an example. It's a pretty standard, common household product whose function is pretty well understood. In short, the product is pretty simple. But what if its difference was something that made it more expensive than a rival brand of smoke detectors? For a more expensive brand, you might write a brand story about the inside workings of your smoke detector. For instance, you could describe the gold contacts, which, by the way, every other smoke detector actually had, and explain how the comparator circuit functioned to determine if there was smoke in the room. But where's the emotion in that? How does this relate to presenting a simple product in a complicated way? Remember, you should always sell a simple product that is clearly understood by the consumer, perhaps in a more complicated way, and a more complicated product in a very simple way. So how about using the analogy of a nose so sensitive that it can sniff out smoke and alert you faster than any other brand of nose? You've now explained a simple product in a complicated way that's actually pretty well easily understood. In addition to the concept of simple versus complex, you should always check your copy to make sure that you've explained all of the main features. And ask yourself, did I explain the product sufficiently to my prospective reader? You might ask a number of people to read your copy to see if they understand the product and its features. Look at the questions that they raise and see if you've actually addressed them fully in your own copy. Highlight those features that make your product or service new, unique, or novel. This might appear to be the same as the copy element product explanation that we've just discussed, but it is different. Here you're revealing not just the features of the product, but the features that distinguish it from anything else on the market. This too links to the core path of the CBBE model from the branding unit. Regardless of the product or service, each brand piece can be enhanced with a technical explanation if a product or service calls for it. We all like to buy something from an expert, somebody that we like, respect, and trust. Buying is indeed a process of trust. The buyer's thought process might be, I trust that you really know your subject and fully understand the product category and have described your product to me properly. It will give me something of value that I want in return for my money. Trust is always enhanced when the seller has become an expert at what he or she is selling. Let's say that the seller says, I've studied everything that I could on competitive products and know everything that there is about the product that I'm selling. So I know that what I'm offering you is the best product at the best value. You'd naturally have a great deal of confidence that this seller's product is indeed going to be good. You might also be impressed if the seller, in describing the product, used words that you didn't understand. Why? Because it would appear that the seller really was an expert about this product. This isn't a deception. A seller must become an expert on the product in order to talk about it in a technical language. In a mail order ad, technical explanations can add a great deal of credibility, but before you write them, make sure you indeed become an expert. If not, the consumer will see right through the ploy. My caveat to this is to use technical language sparingly. You don't want to do overkill. The point is to use technical phrases and language sparingly, but well. If my brand had something to do with a special and innovative kind of circuit, I would have to use key technical phrases or words that were appropriate. For instance, if I created a space-age type of neoprene for wetsuits, again, I would establish credibility and expertise by using a few key technical phrases or words, maybe particularly about its actual manufacturing process. Providing a technical explanation that the reader may not understand shows that we really did our research. And if we say it's good, it must be good. It builds confidence in the buyer that he or she is indeed dealing with an expert. Our brand copy pieces, whatever the form, should always convey thorough knowledge not only of what we're selling, but the entire universe of similar brands that are available. Even for something as seemingly straightforward as music, I convey why the album I'm promoting is worthy of a prospective audience's money as any other particular price point. Actually, more worthy. Remember those Satyagraha copy pieces? Mumford & Sons, The Lumineers, Florence and the Machine, and Kings of Leon were all direct competitors. In brand storytelling terms, they were the adversaries. I had this squarely in mind when I produced the copy, and created the buying environment in the form of distinct listening context, something no other record label really does, or indeed, to this day still does. They still don't do this. With subtle hints to the identity of who these adversaries were, and why the prospect should choose to spend their money on Satyagraha and not one of the others, I was displaying my expert knowledge for that genre of music. In this case, the technical explanation was actually an explanation about the genre. If it were fashion, the technical explanation might actually be the kind of fashion that you produced: couture, street style, sportswear, ready-to-wear, etc. If you write books, it would be the genre of your writing: romance, historical nonfiction, autobiography. For photographers, that technical explanation would be your style of photography: art, commercial, wildlife, natural history, geographic, landscape, weddings, etc. The consumer appreciates the effort we take, feels more confidence in the purchase, and consequently is motivated to reach into his or her pocket and exchange money for our brand's product or service. Anticipating objections. This is a very important element to consider when writing copy. If you feel that your prospective audience member might raise some objection when you're describing your product or service, then raise the objection yourself. Remember, you're not in front of the consumer, and you have to sense what the next question might actually be. If you sense that there might be an objection and you ignore it, it's like ignoring the audience member. You won't get away with it. The consumer, especially consumers today, they're far too sharp and they just won't buy. This could be an objection about price, design, aesthetic appeal, packaging, whatever. So raise the objection yourself at the very beginning of your copy. Call it the worst looking product that you've ever seen, and later justify the product by calling attention to its special features. However, only after you've raised the design objection yourself. Often, products that require installation concern consumers. It's then that you have to raise the question about the installation yourself and not hide from the facts. Another example would be if the brand is a charity or a non-profit where a significant portion of the funds go towards operation and administrative costs in proportion to the beneficiaries or recipients of the charitable funds. Front-load that objection and then explain why the admin and operational costs take such a chunk of money. If you're a tree cutter, explain why customers may have to wait longer for your services in the autumn. It's a busy time for all tree cutters. If your brand is a fashion brand or a millinery brand, explain why each one of those hand-tailored, hand-sewn garments and hats is what makes them more expensive than mass-manufactured alternatives. The other side of anticipating objections is resolving objections. Just as you have to recognize objections, it's your opportunity and duty to resolve the objections too. You must be honest and provide alternative solutions or dispel the objections completely. For example, in 2006, Gillette introduced its new five-blade vibrating Fusion razor, which used a small AAA battery located in the handle of the razor itself. A consumer might be wondering, how long is the battery going to last? I mean, that is a perfectly logical question to ask. But Gillette's excellent approach was to both raise the question and then answer it in the statement: for better performance, change the battery every 6 months. L'Oreal answers one objection with the tagline, because you're worth it. Aardvark Records addressed the objections to paying for music through the tagline, "The label that shares," reminding our audience, both prospective and established, that as much as we sold music, we also shared music for free. Buying music allowed that label to actually share music. Who forms the larger part of your audience? Who is your product or service aimed at? Is the majority of your audience male, female, or both genders? Are they female tennis players, a woman in the armed forces, or professional women? Make sure there are no sexual or sexist comments that would likely offend any group, and know your target audience so that you can communicate in their terms. It's also important that you recognize the differences between men and women in terms of what is important to them. Once upon a time, as the story goes, advertisers said that women were generally into color, fashion, family, home, and relationships. Men were more likely into sports, military combat, machines, earning money, and supporting their families. Those former gender distinctions have been blurred in Western societies. Notice I said Western societies. Being aware of the differences, and sometimes the lack of differences, is the most important point here. And this awareness can help you harmonize with your target audience by understanding how to communicate with them and knowing what might likely offend them. Clarity. Your copy should always be clear, simple, short, and to the point. Avoid big words that confuse those who don't know them, and which often establish the writer as a pompous snob, unless of course you're trying to appeal to pompous snobs. Keep it simple. The clearer the copy and the more concise it is, the easier it will be for people to read and get on the slippery slide and stay there. The only exception to this rule is when you give a technical explanation as described earlier in the session. Okay, cliches. Avoid the obvious ones. These are things like, "Here's the product the world's been waiting for," or "It's too good to be true." If you feel inclined to use a cliche, don't. Cliches seem to be used when you have really nothing significant or good to say, and are usually just trying to fill up space. How do you know if you're writing a cliche? If it sounds like you're writing typical advertising copy some advertising agency would have written 20 years ago, that's one clue. Or if it sounds like something that comes out of one of those movie trailer voiceovers. Just like music has a rhythm, so does copy. Humor writers know this well. If you can write good humor, you've already got the rhythm thing down pat. In fact, the most difficult copy to write is humor. Why humor? Because you have to know how to build up to a punchline and then deliver it. You have to know how not to be too obvious in your delivery, and you've got to understand the art of timing. So what does this rhythm sound or feel like in advertising copy? It has no distinct pattern. It could be a short sentence, then a long sentence, followed by a medium-length sentence, followed by a short sentence, and then another short sentence, and then one really long sentence. Got it? In short, a mixture of sentence lengths that, kind of when read together, gives a sense of variety and rhythm. Think about how copy would sound if all the sentences were very short or very long, or they all had a distinct, predictable pattern. It's pretty boring. And that's the point of copy rhythm. Vary your sentences, vary their length to give your copy a rhythm. Another rhythmic technique is the use of what's called a triad. Very often when I list examples or attributes of something, I use just 3 of them. For example, take the sentence, "I went shopping for a hammer, a screwdriver, and a pair of pliers." In copy, you list 3 items in a series with the last item preceded by the word and you create a nice rhythm within that sentence. If you're selling an expensive product, or one that is not easily returnable for service, you must address the question of service and convey the ease of that service to the consumer. Often the mention of a brand name manufacturer is all that's needed to establish ease of service. But if there is a remote possibility that the consumer would still ask about the service, then you must address this in your copy. If you were selling a game console, let's say Xbox, we can reasonably expect that a buyer might have concerns about the matter of service. What if the console broke and required repair? It's large and expensive, and the inconvenience of a broken console will be in the back of an audience member's mind. We address that concern in the copy. You could use a subheadline called Service and give instructions in the remote likelihood that something did go wrong with the console. It could be a diagnostic button that would display the fault or problem, then referring to a handbook or calling a toll-free number. It could be a no questions asked return and replacement policy, with the brand manufacturing, collecting, and sending a replacement console for free. If service is a consideration in the subconscious mind of the consumer, and you address it up front, you will melt away any resistance to buying that particular product. If you can sincerely relay to your customer that their service problems are genuinely taken on board as your service problems, this is a powerful and emotional bit of copy. Of course, that means walking the talk every single time. Physical facts. In copy, you must mention all the physical facts about your product or you risk reducing your response. I'm talking about things like weight, dimensions, size, limits, speed, and things like that. Sometimes you might think that a certain dimension isn't really important, or the weight may not be necessary, but it's not true. Give readers any excuse not to buy, and they won't buy. Don't assume that if you don't mention it, people will call or email and ask about it. The majority won't bother to call and check. The basic point is this: list the physical dimensions, even in cases where you think they aren't that important. Whenever possible, offering a price comparison to another product establishes value in the mind of the purchaser. It also answers a basic question which you can front-load into your copy. This points out one of the really important considerations that motivate consumers to buy, namely that they're getting real value. If you're selling an expensive item, or something that is good value when compared to another product, you'll want to consider a price comparison as a means of establishing the value of your product. If your product is the most expensive product being offered, then you want to suggest that it has more or better features. If your product is less expensive, then you want to focus on better value and use a price comparison. But here's a word of caution. Your comparison must be totally accurate and be 100% fair, or you could actually be sued by the company whose product you're comparing yours to. Should the price be obvious? Should it be set in large type or small type? These are important considerations and they have to be looked at. If you're selling a product or service at a very good price, then set the price in larger type. After all, you want people to see that benefit very clearly. If the product is expensive, and it's not the price that will sell it, you'll want to underplay it. Don't hide it, just underplay it. As I write my ads, I've always anticipated the questions my prospects will ask. There is one exception. I never know when they're going to wonder about the price of the product. I've always felt that the point at which a reader will want to actually find out about the price could happen anytime during the reading process. It could happen before they read the copy. It could happen halfway through, or it could happen near the end. You must, as an effective copywriter, answer the question when it's being raised by the reader. As you write your copy, ask yourself, when will the reader want to know about price? At this stage, I suggest placing it in the bottom of your copy. And if it's possible to do this in the online form, place it on the left-hand side of the screen. This all has to do with how people scan copy for information. This lower left-hand region is one that's called a hot zone. It's based on eye movement studies when test subjects read various materials. I'd also make this font size larger than the rest of the copy, not ridiculously huge. And I'd also put it in bold. This way the price will pop out and answer the question. A testimonial is a good way to add credibility if it's from a very credible person or organization. This approach can be used not only in the copy, but in the headline, or even a photo. So if your ad copy could use a celebrity, or respected industry voice for a testimonial, make sure the testimonial makes sense for the product. This is something that record labels and film studios do all the time for film and album releases. We garner those reviews from respected magazine and press reviewers and even radio personalities as a hallmark of quality. When I was selling university courses, it was a matter of getting a written thumbs up about the course that I was marketing from within that course's sector. Make sure that the celebrity or industry leader matches with the product and adds credibility. The use of a celebrity who doesn't make sense for your product or doesn't add credibility could backfire, have the wrong effect, and kill sales if the offer isn't believable. Ease of ordering. Make whatever you're selling easy to order. Use a toll-free number, a coupon, a tear-off reply card, or a QR code, or any vehicle that's easy to understand and use. For those of you who don't know what a QR code is, there's one on the screen. QR stands for Quick Response. This bit of code consists of black modules, which we see as square dots, arranged in a square grid on a white background, which can be read by an imaging device like a smartphone or a tablet. Typically, it will take you to a web page, the URL of which is represented within the square that you see. You can put these pretty much anywhere, in print copy, or you can even use them in online copy. Always provide the ordering and contact information at the end of your brand copy piece. This is often forgotten by many copywriters. Have you ever met a salesperson who's already sold you, and you're waiting for that salesperson to ask you for the order, but he or she never does? It's happened to me. And it is one of the problems with a lot of inexperienced salespeople. You've got to ask for the order, and if you're doing it right, it should be at the very end of the brand piece, where you finish selling your prospect, you've summarized the offer, and your prospect is ready to buy. So make it easy for them to buy. This brings us to the end of our session. Please move on to doing the scenarios and the template, and again, please familiarize yourself with the reading in the reading room. And I'll see you in the next session.